Hello, and welcome to Aftershock Talk with Leah Gardine from the Alaska Earthquake Center. What is your title, Leah?
So I am the outreach coordinator, but I'm also a seismologist and cartographer.
Ooh, a cartographer. So you like to make some maps, do you?
I make a lot of maps, yes.
You do it on your free time? You draw like little topographic maps while you're on the phone conversations?
I make a lot of maps, yeah. A lot of fun, yeah, lots of maps.
You must, when people say, how do you get to your party? It must be, oh, wait a minute,
I've got a map for that, exactly.
Right, I'm getting distracted. So on November 30th, there was a huge, well, relatively huge, it felt huge, earthquake near Anchorage, and people are still feeling the effects of that earthquake. And one of the things is earthquakes can't be predicted, but they're very, very scary. And I'm assuming that one of the reasons that the Alaska Earthquake Center exists and why seismologists are working is to help people understand what's going on, because understanding can mitigate that fear.
Exactly. One of our major mission is basically to help build Alaska's earthquake resilience, so our ability not just to withstand earthquakes, but to rebuild afterwards and to understand what has happened. And we do this through our monitoring efforts and our outreach and our engagement.
Which is what we're doing right now.
Exactly.
So in some of this stuff, and the first thing is you guys communicate on Twitter a lot. But your Facebook presence is a closed group that people can join. And if you want to search for that on Facebook, it is the Alaska Earthquake Center Facebook group. And there's been people, and Ian, I think, was working over the break, posting a bunch of great information out there, some of which we're going to be talking about today. But that's a great place to go and to see some of the stuff, some of the information that we're going to be talking about today.
Yep, and a lot of our reason for, since you mentioned that it's a closed group, a lot of the reason that we made it a closed group is to help facilitate discussion. Sometimes, when it's completely open to the public, people are uncomfortable asking questions, whereas we want you to be able to ask us questions.
Absolutely. I've made some crawlers, and we're just this is some new software, so I'm just trying to figure out how to get these things, but I'm not going to worry so much about that. So from what I have read, the aftershocks that we've been feeling, over 6,000 of them now. Is that right?
Yep, you're more than 6,000. Yep.
And that's sort of a record number of earthquakes that you've monitored in the past years.
Yep, a record number. We've located over 50,000 so far for 2008, and we're not finished doing our data analysis yet. So there will actually, that number's not 100% determined yet. We're still locating earthquakes in 2008.
But an aftershock is an earthquake, and one of the things that I read was it's sort of where the earthquake / aftershock is felt that determines whether or not it counts as an aftershock versus a new earthquake.
Well, so yes, it's where it's located. So when a large earthquake happens, it happens somewhere in space, and that space has a dimension. It's not a single point. So there's it's a crack, it's a plane, and that plane has a length and an area to it, basically. So any earthquake that occurs immediately after a main earthquake in the vicinity of that crack, we usually consider that to be an aftershock. So sometimes it's not necessarily related to that main shock, but it's really hard to pull those apart from each other. So really, as long as the earthquakes are occurring in that general area from where the main shock occurred, within a certain amount of time before the everyday activity goes back to what we consider background or average, we'll consider those to be aftershocks.
And from what the thing I read today is that could be more than a year from now.
Correct. We're still the 7.9 offshore Kodiak earthquake. Just over the last couple of days, there have all of a sudden been some earthquakes around magnitude 4 still occurring as aftershocks from that particular earthquake.
Earthquakes are fascinating in general. Can you describe a little bit about the different kinds of earthquakes that are out there and what the Anchorage one was versus some other earthquakes that are going on? There's different kinds of how the Earth's crust and the seismic plates move against each other.
I was wondering where you were. So the different mechanisms of earthquake is basically what you're getting at. So there are some earthquakes.
Are they groovy earthquakes where like they're shaking like this, and so you call it a disco earthquake, and then you got the EDM earthquake where you go up and down like that. Or I'm sure those aren't the names that you have for them.
Not quite, but we have. So there are different causes of earthquakes, so different mechanisms that trigger these earthquakes. And so some of the different types are like in 1964, the magnitude 9.2. That earthquake occurred at the interface between the subducting Pacific plate and the overriding North American plate. However, we can get earthquakes not just where those two plates touch each other, but in the individual plates themselves based on different forces. So for example, the magnitude 7 Anchorage earthquake actually occurred in the Pacific plate that was being pulled beneath Alaska. So it was in the plate itself and not where those two plates touch.
A friend of mine described it as the Earth recycling itself.
Basically, yeah. I mean, there's still a lot of unknowns as to what happens once that Pacific plate gets pulled down. What actually happens to it? Because since we can't just cut the Earth open and look, we have to do a lot of. So there's still some competing theories and some competing analysis for what happens. But it is essentially recycling. Yes.
That's pretty exciting. Did you learn something new from the magnitude 7 earthquake near Fairbanks? Has it generated some new data for you? Are you thinking about things in a new way?
Honestly, I mean, earthquakes, these. You
can't say it's just a normal, boring earthquake.
And to a degree, I mean, we've got a lot more data. We've got a lot more stations now. And so as of right now, the analysis is really just digging in to the causes and the implications of this particular earthquake. So kind of right now for us, it's kind of a standard earthquake.
It was not standard for the people who felt the effects of it.
Exactly. I mean, and this one is still, was fairly deep. A more shallow earthquake would have a completely different set of parameters and a completely different set of reactions and implications. And so, yeah, as we're locating these earthquakes and we're building this data set, more and more information is going to come out, and we're going to learn a whole lot more from the earthquake because of the abundance of data that we have right now.
One of the things that I read was some of these aftershocks, these other earthquakes that have happened, may have happened anyway, no matter if the Anchorage, or I don't know if you have a name, the November 30th earthquake happened. So there's no way of really differentiating. This happened because of the Earth is settling into its new sort of shape.
And so, yeah, so it's entirely possible that some of these magnitude 5s, because the people who live there know you experience frequent earthquakes, whether it's once every few months an earthquake is felt or sometimes more frequently. So some of those what we're calling aftershocks, because of where they're occurring, may have happened without having the magnitude 7. But again, because they're in that area of the magnitude 7, we're calling them aftershocks.
So from my understanding of how the Earth works, there's the ocean, or the layer of magma, the molten rock that the plates move around on. Why aren't earthquakes happening all the time? Why does an earthquake stop?
Well, that is actually a kind of a tricky question. So there's the stress field. So the Earth is constantly in some sort of stasis, and there's always going to be, like, if you take a cookie and you start bending a cookie and you get small little cracks in it, it doesn't always break all the way in half. Sometimes you just get little cracks. But you can bend it for a while, and depending on the type of material that cookie is made out of, those cracks are going to be different. And so it's kind of one way of looking at it would, there are different physics that go into the individual forces that are on these different faults. And so maybe there wasn't enough force to make a bigger break, or the way it broke meant that it changed the force on it. And so there's all this physics that goes into it that determines, kind of where these boundaries are. But those kinds of things, especially when it comes to earthquakes, we don't know those numbers until after the earthquakes happened.
You can't predict it. There's no way at all. Any predictive modeling out there that is going on that people might be seeing on the internet, that is just something that somebody is making up. There is no earthquake prediction tool known to the human race at this time.
And I mean, and even when you see these things that are out there, they're throwing probabilities at you. I mean, there's always it's the probability that it's going to rain tomorrow. The likelihood of it raining tomorrow here in Fairbanks at -20 is probably pretty slim. We're going to get snow, but there's always some random non-zero number that says that something could happen. And so when you start throwing probabilities around, it tends to confuse people because because it just means that there's always the random possibility, but that doesn't mean that the likelihood is actually there.
I like this term. I've heard it a couple of times now over the past couple of months. It's non-zero. So non-zero can be very, very small, but I think as scientists, you can't say that nothing is going to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, and we cannot definitively 100% say it can't happen, but we can say that the likelihood is so tiny. It's like if everybody competed in a global lottery where there was one winner, whether or not the people are going to pick that, whether that one person could pick the right number or not is, so it's all probability. And so when you get into probability, there is no zero.
In the Alaska Earthquake Center, you guys do such a great job of putting out good information, reliable information, and communicating with the people that have questions all the time. Just the fact that you had Ian working throughout the whole break, sharing stuff, updating regularly, and you guys are monitoring earthquakes all over Alaska, which is larger than some countries in the globe. How do you guys do that? How do you look at what's going on in such a vast area?
We have a very, very dedicated staff. And even when we take breaks, some of us don't fully turn off our phones and break away. I mean, I went on Christmas break, but I was still in contact with Ian, whether, some of us were, do you need a graphic for this? And, does this sound right? And so we're all still kind of having those conversations, even when we're detaching ourselves from work. But yeah, we love what we do.
One of the graphs that I've seen, because I joined the group just about a month or so ago, talked about the energy that was released by the November 30th earthquake and all of the seismic energy that's been released from all of the follow-up aftershocks and earthquakes since then. And even though everyone in Anchorage, and I see it all over social media, that every time something happens, there's another one, oh my gosh, how long is this going to go on? The energy that was released from that initial shock was significantly greater than all of the other things put together.
Exactly. So just to throw some numbers at you, the difference in energy between a magnitude 6 and a magnitude 7 earthquake, for example, a magnitude 7 earthquake has 32 times the amount of energy of a magnitude 6. So basically, it would take the energy from 32 magnitude 6 earthquakes to come anywhere close to what one magnitude 7 would be. So that's something like 900 magnitude 5 earthquakes to equate to the energy of one magnitude 7.
And the average about aftershock size has been around 5.
I mean, yeah, the largest ones are in the 5s, yeah.
900 of those to match the energy from that one that happened. And how long did that November 30th earthquake last? Some people have said, was it 2 minutes? That was a lot of questions that I heard. Like, how long did that go on?
Well, so the earthquake itself, so there's two separate questions and two separate answers in there. The earthquake itself, so the source, the amount of time that the earth itself broke during that earthquake was actually on the order of, according to the USGS, around 12 seconds. So the earth itself broke in 12 seconds. However, as that energy travels throughout the earth and as is felt in the buildings and the people, kind of gets drawn out. So you feel that residual shaking for longer, depending on what floor of a building you're in, what ground your building is built on. So whether you're on fill versus hard rock, or on the 6th floor of a building versus the ground floor of a building. So how you feel that shaking is mostly dependent on where you are. So that's the intensity of the shaking, and the duration of that intensity is highly variable depending on where you are and your situation.
And that's one of the things that I like so much about the Earthquake Center is it's not just the data of the numbers, it's the feeling of what happened. It's so important when you're talking about earthquakes like this. My last question for you, I'll let you get back to work, is talk to me a little bit about the Did You Feel It page, the citizen science part of what the Alaska Earthquake Center does, and how much you rely on people reporting what they have felt and where they have felt it. And is that anonymous, or are there names that are connected with when people report on the Did You Feel It page?
So there are a couple of ways that felt reports are obtained. So the USGS maintains a Did You Feel It database. So that's through the National Earthquake Information Center and the USGS. And so when you click on the Did You Feel It link and you go in and you type all of that information in, that goes into a global database. And that data is actually then the intensity of what you were feeling. And the reason that they ask those questions is we have what are called shake maps. So they're maps that basically map the intensity of an earthquake. And those are generated in the early stages right after an earthquake happens. And so they use the data when you submit felt reports. They can go back and refine those shake maps over time, or they can use that data in a predictive sense for when they're doing future earthquakes in those areas, kind of what the ground in certain areas, how it reacts. Does that make sense? And so they use it to update existing earthquake data as well as update their programs to be more responsive and more correct in the future.
I see. So it matches what they have recorded and where the people felt it, and like, okay, this is what we modeled, we think will happen, and this is what someone reported actually happening. And then when the closer, I know scientists work really hard to make sure what they come up with in the lab actually matches what happens in the world. And it sounds like that's where the Did You Feel It information really comes in.
Exactly. And then the other way that felt reports and damage reports and things are used, we provide all of the information that we collect to emergency managers so that they can get an idea of hardest hit areas as well. And they have their metrics, and so we sort of support other agencies through this is the information that we've gathered to help you, as well as they use those shake maps in their analysis as well.
Thank you so much for joining me for Aftershock Talk. I think the great thing is that at the end of the day, what people are feeling in the Anchorage area is a gradual lessening of and over time. And I think it's that there'll be a time when it's normal again. It's just going to take a few more months for our planet to settle down after its cookie broke.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I know. I think there's some over the. Okay. Thank you, Leah. I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you so much, and keep on doing the great work you do at the Alaska Earthquake Center.
Thank you, Andrew.
Bye.
Bye.